As a professional illustrator, I do nearly all of my work in Adobe Fresco on the iPad. In this video, I'll provide an overview of the app, all the different tools, so you'll be ready to dive in and make some rad stuff. And hey, if you're already using Fresco, maybe stick around anyway, because I'll be sharing some of my favorite tips and tricks that maybe you don't know about. Maybe you do. I don't know. You can leave if you want. There are a few reasons why Adobe Fresco is my preferred app over similar apps like Procreate. One of the main reasons is that it's part of the Adobe Creative Cloud suite, and as a professional illustrator, I'm often working with Photoshop and Illustrator files, as those are the industry standard. Fresco files work seamlessly back and forth between the different Adobe apps, which makes it really great for my workflow. And speaking of workflow, a typical workflow for me, well, that's a bunch of workflows in a row. Let me just flow that into the rest of this. So maybe I'll start with a sketch in Fresco, and then go over to my computer, open it up in Photoshop, maybe make some adjustments there, save the file, then go back to my iPad, and the file's already updated with whatever I did in Photoshop. I can go back and forth like this as many times as I want to, and it just works perfectly because, in fact, Fresco files are actually Photoshop files, which is why Photoshop brushes work in Fresco, because it's the same thing. Now, I know you can easily export a PSD from Procreate, but that involves a whole other step because you have the PSD, but then you have to open it up. You could work on that PSD and then you could import it back into Procreate. But in Fresco, it's as easy as saving the file and then it's already there when you go onto your iPad. I actually have a very detailed video going over the differences between Procreate and Fresco. If you're interested in that, I will put a link in the description. Another reason why I love Adobe Fresco is because sometimes I need to deliver vector artwork for some of my client work. When I'm in Fresco, I can easily work in vector or raster. Can work in both in the same file. It's as simple as just choosing vector brushes and drawing whatever I need to draw. I can then open up that file in Illustrator and it is ready to go in all of its vector glory. And the other main reason I prefer Fresco is because of how easy it makes it to add motion to your illustrations. I know in Procreate you can use the animation assist and make easy frame-by-frame animations, but in Fresco, you're able to have a timeline for each layer, and you're also able to add motion paths as well. It's incredibly dynamic, and if you want to know more about that, I'll link below to some videos where I go over animating in Fresco. Actually, I think Adobe refers to it as motion, and I think that's a better way to think about it because it's not really animation software. Neither Procreate or Fresco are animation software. They're just a way to add motion to your illustration. You wouldn't animate like a full cartoon in either of these. I feel like a lot of beginner or just like getting started with videos about different apps go into so much detail that they're a bit overwhelming. In this video, I'm not gonna go over everything, but I'm gonna go over enough to get you started and just dive in and start working without feeling like there's too much to learn. So if you're here on this video needing to know every specific detail and all the things you can do in Fresco, this probably isn't the video for you. But if you're starting out in Fresco and you're a little bit confused and just want some tips and tricks, you're in the right place. All right, let's head over to my iPad and dive into Fresco. I'll meet you there. Okay, so I have Fresco opened up here. This is the home screen, and you'll see some options on the side. The learn and discover, to be honest with you, I don't know. I think those are there to teach you some stuff. I have never used those. Below that, you'll see files, you'll see your files, and then over here is like recent files. And then you could like share files between other people in Fresco. And then you've got deleted files, which will be there for a little bit of time before they're gone forever. This is sort of like file purgatory. I think maybe it's 30 days or something like that. I don't know for sure, but they don't immediately go away. Okay, so when you click on your files, it's gonna open up your most recent files. This will be anything that you have saved in Creative Cloud. So if you have like a Photoshop file or something like that, it will show up here. That's saved there, and then you can open it up and edit it like that. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and do a new document, and I'm gonna choose a custom size. And when you're choosing a size, you just wanna make sure that your file is big enough for what you wanna do with it. So, for example, if you ever want to be printing something, you need to make sure it's a minimum of 300 dpi at whatever inch size that you want to use, or centimeters if you are in the rest of the world that use a system that makes sense. I am in silly America, so we're using inches. But here you could type in a size. So let's say I was going to make something to print and I wanted it to be 8 by 10. So I would choose 8 by 10, but then I would make sure that this is 300 dpi. This isn't a video where I'm gonna go into all that stuff, but just know that 300 dpi is the minimum resolution for printing a document. 300 dpi at 100% scale. So we got 8 by 10, 300 dpi, create document, and now we have our file here. The first thing you'll notice when you're in Fresco, as opposed to like Procreate or something like that is there's 3 different kinds of brushes. So the first brush set is just regular raster brushes. So this is just like Procreate. These are, you know, what you would expect, the more pixel-based brushes. Below that is the live brushes. Now I don't use these because I'm not a painter, but these things are super cool, and they're the kind of thing that like I always show people when I'm showing them Fresco or something like that, just because it's magical. So just quickly, because I can't help myself. So these watercolor brushes and like the oil brushes are like they're real, so you can like reactivate them with color and stuff like that. So let's just pick a bright orange color and start painting. And you can see that, you know, you go over it, it just starts to bleed into it. You could grab another color. Let's say we switch to this red. You know, it like reactivates, and you know, you can get pretty wild with this stuff. Super cool. I don't use these at all, but if you're a painter, these are super cool. The oil brushes are very similar. The cool thing about this is you could like mix them here, even though you kind of wouldn't be able to do that in real life. All right, let's delete this mess. Now below the live brushes are your vector brushes. So this is one of the things that I mentioned that sets Fresco apart. So when you're working here, everything you're drawing is vector line work, which is super great. You can zoom in infinitely and it's going to be tight as can be because there are no pixels involved. So underneath the vector brushes, there are some options. I really just use the basic round brush. I don't like any of these other options. There's this like velocity taper. I will note too, though, that I have my smoothing up pretty high, which makes it look like there's a little bit of a lag. There's not a lag, that's just how the smoothing works, which I'm gonna talk about in a minute. But anyway, these are the vector brushes. When you're working in vector, you'll notice on your layers, you'll have this little double circle icon. That just means it's a vector layer. You can see that same thing under the brush. It's like that white circle with the blue. That means it's a vector layer. So you can have both vector layers and pixel layers. So if I do a new layer and I grab a pixel brush and I draw on this layer, you'll see that that one has the pixel icon. This is the way you can keep them separate, and it's cool that you can work in both raster and vector in one file. So the eraser tool is below that. I honestly don't really use the regular eraser that much. I use the modifier with the brush. So let me show you how that works. So let me grab a brush that I like and use often. So this Retro Supply Co. Classic Inker, if you're interested in these retro brushes. There's a link in my profile to those. So this brush has some tooth to it. I'm zoomed in a little bit so you can kind of see that detail. But let's say I want to erase this and I grab the standard eraser and I go in and I erase that. It's got this like clean line, and it's hard to sort of make this texture look natural when I erase it. So let me undo that. Go back to the brush. So instead of using the eraser, you can just double tap on this little modifier circle thing, and this changes your brush to an eraser in that same brush. So you can maintain that same texture, which is really cool. And then you just double tap to turn it back off. I feel like this is easier than grabbing the eraser as well. Below that is like the smudge tool or something. I don't use this, to be honest, but you can smudge. I mentioned that this isn't going to cover everything, but this is going to get you started. So, you know, this is not the video where we talk about the smudge tool. So let's delete that, and we'll go down. This is your select tool. We can't select anything because our layer is empty, but if I draw something here, I can grab the selection tool, and then I can move it around or transform it or skew it or just distort it in some way. There's also the liquify, which is cool, but I don't really use it that often. I don't know, you can do cool stuff with it. You can make interesting shapes with it. It's a nice feature. There's different options. You can like make it suck into the center or blow it up. It's a good way to like smooth out shapes and stuff like that. I just always sort of forget about it, but it's a cool feature. So we've got the selection tool below that. There's like the lasso tool, which you can draw a selection around a certain area and then it'll select that area. If you want to like cut and paste that selection, if you tap on the layer, you can go to cut selection and then paste selection, and now we've got that shape on its own layer. You can also use the magic wand selection, and that just selects like the full whatever shape you've got there. You can also like paint select, so like paint an area that you want to select. I don't really use this one either, but it's actually pretty handy. And then you've got typical shape selection things. And then you can also load the last selection if you like deselect something and then want to reselect it. At the bottom, you'll see some tools that pop up for what you're using. So this is to like transform what's being selected, and then you can erase what's in the selection. So what I have selected is actually not on the layer I'm working on. So if I click down on this layer and hit erase, it'll get rid of that because that's what was selected. Up at the top here, you'll see these two arrows pointing different directions. This is undo and this is redo. So if I do undo, it'll undo what I just erased. If I hit this, it'll redo, erasing it. So let's deselect that. Let's move down to the paint bucket. The paint bucket is a helpful tool. If you're used to Procreate, you'll know that you sort of drag a color down to fill a spot. When you are using Fresco, you use a paint bucket tool like Photoshop, and you just sort of tap where you want to fill. You'll see that there's this white halo around the edges. You can adjust that with your color margin here. You can pull this up until it goes away. The reason why I like the paint bucket versus dragging it in is because if you have like multiple things like this, you can just go in and tap them both, as opposed to like dragging for each thing in Procreate. Below that, we've got some shapes. To be honest, I don't use these either, but you can insert shapes from, you know, Adobe stock or whatever they're providing here. Not something that I use, not something you need to worry about unless you want to use those things. Below that is your text tool. You just can click, start typing, pulls up the keyboard, and you can do butt fart because that is something you might type. And then you'll see here style text. This is where you can choose a font. And then you could change the size here. You can adjust the spacing. If you want more space in between the letters, you can do that. You can also go back to like the transform tool and change the size that way. If you wanted to like edit your type like it's an image, you could go ahead and tap on that type layer and then convert to pixel layer, and then you could draw like directly on this layer. So if you like grabbed your brush, you know, you could be adding to it or customizing it, or you know, you could erase parts of it. You could put some sweet motion lines on it. You could do whatever you want. Below that is the eyedropper tool. This allows you to select a color. So you would just like hold on it and it would grab a color. Obviously we don't have any colors here, but if we did, that's how you would do it. You can also use that from, like if you're in the brush and you're drawing, you don't have to switch to the eyedropper tool. You can just be in the brush, drawing this, you got white, and you're like, okay, I want to draw black now. You could just hold on this and then it'll switch to black. So that's pretty helpful. Below that is if you wanted to add an image to your document. So if I went ahead and let's say I grabbed the skull drawing that I did, it'll load that in there, which is pretty cool. The other thing that Adobe does, if you saw that little update, is that it creates a color palette from your image. So this is a cool thing if you find an image that you really like the colors on and you want to steal them. It'll automatically create a palette for you. So when we go into our colors here, you'll see this color palette was generated from this image. So that's a really cool feature that is nice. So when your image is placed, you'll notice it's got this like image icon. That means it's not something that you can draw with or work with because it's like an image file, but you can go ahead and convert it to a pixel layer, and then you can do whatever you want with it. You can draw with it. You can, you know, erase stuff, whatever you want to do. You could go in and grab the liquify brushes, start messing around with that. With the liquify brushes, I don't know, I don't use them. But as you can see, you could do some cool stuff with it. Like that type effect is kind of cool, like that. I think I might have to use this more often. Look at this, what we got here. This is some good stuff. I'm gonna clean up some of this stuff. So we just have a fresh, clean layer so that I can talk about some stuff. So going over the tools, I started like just willy-nilly talking about layers, so I guess I should cover that so that this makes sense for overall, beginners. When you are drawing, it's going to show up on whatever layer is selected, unless you have a raster layer and you start drawing with a vector brush, then it's automatically going to make a new layer because you can't draw a vector on a raster layer. So what I'll often do with the layers is go in and grab like a pencil brush to sketch something out. Or just draw some letters. I don't know. So I'll like sketch something, get it to roughly what I want it to look like. So maybe there's some 3D letters that say what. And then I'll turn down the opacity and then make a new layer and then draw a tighter version on top of that. So sometimes it's another sketch, so maybe I won't go right to an inking brush or something I want to use yet because I still want to refine this, and I'll use this as like a guide. So I'll like lower the transparency or the opacity of the layer, which you can do here. This controls how much of the layer you see. And then maybe I want it to like wiggle a little bit, so I'll use that sketch layer underneath, make some wiggly lines. Like that. So I'm just sort of getting a feel for the composition, and it's okay. That's good enough for me. So then I'll like go ahead. I'll go back in and delete that first sketch layer, and then I'll use this. And then I'll make a new layer to do like my tightened up line work. So that at that point I'll often switch to, this classic inker that I like a lot, or Kyle Webster's Too Smooth to Be Forgotten. I'm gonna go back to this classic inker because that's the one I like. So I want to do some black line work, so I'll switch this to black. And if I'm doing some like smooth lines like this, what I'll do is I'll turn up the smoothing on my brush, and this will help it make a clean line without me having to be that smooth. So as you can see, it's already at 100 because that's where I often use this. But let me show you the difference. So when this is turned all the way down, if I'm trying to make this like smooth edge, it's I'm doing an okay job now. But sometimes if it's early in the day and I've had a lot of coffee, my hands aren't that steady. So let's undo that and then let's look at the difference. So if you click on this little smoothing thing, bring that up to 100, then it gives it a little bit of a delay because it sort of slows things down, but it gives you a really nice smooth line. I know there's some people who aren't used to this, how the smoothing works. Whoops. I'm not wearing my gloves, so sometimes I accidentally undo things. People who aren't used to the way the smoothing works might think that there's like lag in Fresco if they're using a brush with the smoothing turned all the way up. But it's just the way that the smoothing works. It just slows things down. And if you don't like that, you can just bring it all the way down to 0 and there'll be absolutely no lag whatsoever. So that's how I would do this, and how I would do my final line work or whatever, and then I would go in and delete my sketch layer. So let me just finish this up quickly so that I can show you some like coloring options that the layers are good for. This is not very good, but I just want something to do a quick demo with, so I'm gonna get over the fact that I hate this. Okay, so I'll use the paint bucket, fill that in black, and let's say I want to do my color on a separate layer. So what I can do is delete my sketch layer, then make a new layer. I can set this layer as a reference layer, so when you tap on a layer, it opens up this menu that shows you all your different options here where you can like clear it or delete it or duplicate it, copy, paste it, whatever you want to do. But if you do set as a reference, then go on a different layer and grab a color. It'll fill in that shape, but on a separate layer, which is pretty cool. So your color is separate there. So let's delete that color thing. Let's release reference. Another thing you can do is you could lock the transparency, and what that would do is just make it so that whatever you draw will just go in the spaces where you have a drawing. So for example, if I'm drawing here, you don't see anything, but then once I get to the line work, that color comes in. I use this sometimes if I'm trying to like add some grit or texture. So I'll lock transparency and like grab a texture brush. Use this one for an example. Choose white and then sort of like come in and add some grit and texture to it. You could do this another way, a non-destructive way, by making a new layer and then hitting this clipping mask button. So you could do this in a non-destructive way by hitting a new layer and then doing the clipping mask option, which is this little square with the arrow. So this will do the same thing, but it puts it on a separate layer so that you can toggle it on and off and it doesn't mess with your initial line work, which is a cool feature. All right, so let's go back to where we had the color on its separate layer. If you wanted to group these so that if you had a lot of stuff in your composition and you wanted to keep things separately, or if you wanted to resize this, what you could do is click and hold on the layer and then drag it onto the one below that, and now these are in a group together. So now if we use the transform tool, it's going to transform everything within that group, which is pretty cool. You can also do a clipping mask onto that whole group. So if we grabbed this like texture, it would do it over the whole thing, even though they're separate layers. So the other things over here are this plus makes a new layer. The eye turns the layer on or off. That's your clipping mask layer. This is your adjustments layer. So if you wanted to like adjust, anything within the image, you could go ahead and make an adjustment layer on top of that. And that way, if you turned it off, you'd still have your original color, which is a helpful feature. And then you've just got more layer options here, which is the same as if you just like clicked on a layer on its own. When you're ready to save an image, you would go up here and you could do a quick export if you just wanted a quick JPEG or something, or a PNG, or you can go into publish and then you've got some more options here. So you can do export as, you could choose a PNG, hit exports, save image. You could also go in here and export a time lapse. So we could watch a time lapse of this incredible artwork that I created. I do have a video about patterns which goes over what that does. It's a really cool feature. So if you want to check that out, I will put a link to my patterns video in the description. So within the layers, you've got different blend modes, which affects how they're seen. The only one I really use is multiply. So I often will add like a texture onto my images. So if I go in here to my photos and go to albums, favorites, grab a texture. So let's say I have this paper texture. If I turn the blend mode to multiply, you'll see it overlays the texture on top of my illustration. There's all kinds of different things you can do with layer effects, but again, this is just a video to get started, so I'm not going to go into all that stuff because this video would be a million years long. I do want to quickly touch on the animation features, but I do have full-on animation videos in Fresco, as I mentioned at the beginning, but just quickly, let me show you what you can do with the animation features. So to animate, you just click on this little thing down below, and this opens up a timeline, and you can have a timeline for each and every layer. So let's say draw a circle, you hit plus. If you go into settings below this, you could turn on onion skin, and that'll show you your previous frame. So I'm just gonna trace that circle again, do another one, trace that again, and then you could hit play, and then you've got this moving shape. So that's just like Animation Assist in Procreate, but Fresco also gives you paths. So if you hit path here, we can draw a path, and then that's gonna follow that path. If you look over on the right, we've got some different options. So we can decrease the amount of frames to make it go faster, or add more frames to make it go slower. We can also ease in and out, so it starts slow and then gets fast. We could use this grow and shrink, so where it gets bigger as it goes down. You can choose the amount of times something happens. There's also this sway option, which is pretty cool, which, you know, it moves a little bit. It's a little hard to tell because my image is the same thing, but if you had more variety in your shape, that would change. You can also add multiples, which is really cool. You can just get a whole bunch of them, and then you could like scatter them. And you could also like randomize them, so it like changes. And it's crazy because it's just like this one little circle that's like vibrating. It's so easy to like add all these different things. Okay, so let's pause that. So the paths are something that sets Fresco animation apart, but on top of that, as I mentioned, each layer can have its own timeline. So if I do a new layer, and let's say we put something on this layer, grab a different color, try not to overthink this here. Let's say we've got this monster, make a new layer. Let's open its mouth. Maybe he's got feet. This is going to be the worst walk sequence ever, but listen, this isn't a drawing tutorial. We'll see how this goes. All right, so that's terrible, but we put it on path and have it walk across. We could say, oh, that's too low, let me move it up. Now it's on the scene, so that guy's walking across. We could make a whole army of these little things, randomize those. We could try the sway thing. So you can see they're like going different directions. You can scatter them. You see we've got chaos going on here. It's pretty neat. So that's why Fresco animation is just completely superior to Procreate in that regard. So that's the gist of it. Again, this isn't super detailed. I just wanted to show you the basics and all that stuff. So that wasn't so bad, was it? Are you feeling inspired to go make some cool stuff in Fresco? Hopefully you are. Hopefully you learned something from this, and if you make some cool stuff and post it on social media, definitely tag me, because I'd love to check it out. And hey, if you are excited about Fresco and want to learn even more, check out this playlist I've got, which has a whole bunch of different videos all about Adobe Fresco. Okay, good talk.